So my name is Ryan Ross Smith, and I was here presenting a lecture on contemporary animated scoring practices and gave a short workshop on how to play these scores.
Okay, so it's the first event to involve DJing and turntablism?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, it's the first time I've been around so many incredible turntablists.
Okay, so, what do you think about the concept of Sample Music Festival to bring science and turntablism DJing together?
Yeah, I mean, it seems to me, of course, not being part of the world or knowing the world of turntablism. But with that said, moving in the direction where you can start to combine these other sorts of, so experimental notation, for example, or the politics of sampling and things like that, like Johannes Kreidler talked about. I think that it can help to generate interest and understanding of turntablism as an art form that can be considered on the same level as you sort of run-of-the-mill orchestral composer, for example. And so, absolutely a step in the right direction.
Do you see some similarities of your approach of making music in comparison to DJing turntablism?
Yeah, I think that especially after this event and really being kind of inundated with turntablism and sampling culture and all of this for the last few days, I've thought a lot about how, in a sense, the kind of music that I'm making is sample-based but acoustic. Thinking about small pieces of sound and how to put those together in some hopefully intriguing way. So I think there's a conceptual connection there, although musically it's, of course, very, very different. Yep, I think that's the answer, yeah.
You got a PhD in electronic music art?
In electronic arts, yes.
You come from a scientific background, so how would you describe the sound of a scratch in comparison to I don't know, so-called traditional sound of a classical?
The sound of a scratch?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think the scratch has a particular sound regardless, I think, of whatever the sound that is being scratched happens to be. So I don't know how to describe what that is, but I would say that I think what's the most intriguing thing about it is that regardless of how you're scratching and all the different ways you're scratching, the different motions and things like that, is that the possibilities, for instance, the content, the music, the sonic content of all of these records, really is, I think, of course, infinite, in quotes, but because every new record that comes out certainly contributes to the database, so to speak, of available sounds. So to describe what that sound would be in some ways is, I think, for me, almost impossible, because it steps so far away from traditional musical cultures. Because you can have the sound of a violin, you can recognize the sound of a violin. It may be that at this point somebody comes up with a new extended technique that you aren't familiar with and you don't realize that that's a violin. But very quickly that becomes adopted by the Western musical tradition. And so then it becomes very obvious what instrument that is. Whereas in these kinds of the appropriation of other types of music in turntablism, it's not always clear where that music's coming from. But then it's being used in creating this, it's not a new art form, but the works that are being created are new. And yeah, so it reached another end of my thought, I think, yeah.
Do you think it would be, could we benefit from a study for turntablism?
A study of turntablism?
Yeah.
I mean, I think a study of any practice or culture or whatever it happens to be can always have some benefits to it. I think the potential problem with anything, once you start to put it under the microscope, is that there's, I think, a desire to codify things and to say, well, this is the way that you this is what you would call this particular scratch, or move on the fader, or whatever it happens to be, and that can be very valuable for somebody who's getting interested in trying to learn how to make these kinds of sounds. But there is also as soon as things get codified, then they can be kind of what's the word I'm thinking of? You can start to kind of rank how well a particular thing is done, because now there is sort of a benchmark for it. And maybe that already is the case with these battles and things like that, looking at how these players are able to do the things that they're doing. There's also the physicality of it and the creativity of it and the aesthetic of it. So I think in general it's a good thing, but the important thing, of course, is to use things like S notation, for example, as a way to kind of enhance or enable participation by people and enable understanding without, but also supporting, people who come into it saying, I don't know anything about it, I'm just going to do my thing, and maybe you're creating really great works. So in general, in short, yes, I think it's a very good thing.
And do you have any ideas to progress the culture of DJing? What do you see when you compare this to your field of making music?
I don't know if I'm really qualified to answer that, just because it's kind of new to me. But I think that, of course, well, the SMF is of course one of the ways to progress the culture, is to increase visibility and to bring in people like myself, Johannes Kreidler, other people who are maybe not working with samples in the same way, or are maybe not working with samples at all. At least certainly nothing I presented was sample based. But I do work with samples, and I work with samples in other things. And so being able to have conversations about the way that I work with samples with these people, I think that there is a lot for me to gain and to learn about these other uses of samples. And so as I think there's maybe an increasing volume and diversity of people who can come in, experimental turntablism, things like that. Somebody like Maria Chavez, for example. This raises awareness in different fields of practice, and I think that, and then when it comes down to it, you after all the talks, you get to dance, and so it still kind of goes back to this sort of foundation, and I think that's really important.